Well, I made the mistake of deciding to finally watch the AniGoji, or animated Gojira trilogy. For those unaware, this was a series of 3 films set 20,000 years in the future about humanity's survivors and 2 alien species attempting to reclaim Earth from Godzilla in a post-apocalyptic landscape. While it does provide some incredible lighting and cinematography, and a few of the takes on post-apocalyptic versions of Toho's most famous kaiju are quite intriguing, the overwhelming eco-fascist and nihilistic themes, lack of likable characters, and bizarrely racist undertones make it a slog of misery. However, unlike the last 2 Godzilla movies I reviewed on this channel, I didn't want my only public opinions on a series that I really love to be only negative, so I will not be reviewing them today. Rather, I want to talk about one of my favorite films in the franchise, and one of my favorite films in general, and discuss why I find it so fantastic. Today, I want to discuss Mothra vs. Godzilla. The 4th Godzilla and 2nd Mothra film, Mothra vs. Godzilla, was released in 1964, 10 years after the original. While many classify the 60s and 70s sequels as silly and juvenile, while they aren't necessarily as dire as Gojira or King of the Monsters, several of these sequels are not only entertaining, but have poignant messages to share about humanity. Mothra vs. Godzilla is masterful. What could have easily made money as a crossover with 2 huge stars punching each other contains deep reflections on themes of the destructive nature of capitalism, the harm of nuclear weapons, the rights of indigenous peoples, death and rebirth, the meaning of parenthood, and the role of a journalist within a democratic society. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend you give it a watch, which I believe you can still do legally on YouTube for free. But, to quickly summarize, the film follows Ichiro Sakai, a jaded reporter, and Juko Nakanishi, an eager photographer, as they investigate a bizarre set of findings on Kurata Beach following a typhoon. Along with an incredible amount of detritus, they find what seems to be shrapnel, which they bring to a Professor Miura, who agrees to analyze it for them. However, they are distracted by this now giant egg that has washed up on shore. And this egg has been purchased by the president of Happy Enterprises, who intends to transform this egg into a tourist trap. Junko, Ichiro, and Professor Miura are not fans of this idea. However, despite their vocalized disapproval, Happy Enterprises is going forward with their egg plan. Thus, the Shobijin, or Mothra twins, or infant island fairies, appear and appeal to our 3 main humans to intervene. While they cannot convince Happy Enterprises to return the egg, they do publicize their duplicity with another sentient being's egg. This comes to a head when the egg attracts Godzilla, and the trio must call on Mothra at Infant Island for help. Despite initial distrust from the islanders, the kaiju does slow Godzilla's assault and sacrifices her life force for the egg, which hatches twins that fight the giant atomic reptile to save a class of school children, and in turn saving lots of Japan. All around great stuff, but what makes it one of my favorite movies? Well, it's not so much the plot as it is the themes. Mothra vs. Godzilla is the last time Godzilla would appear as a purely antagonistic character for a few decades, and it is not without a great presence. Throughout the series, Godzilla has had a few major characterizations. Sometimes he's a protector, sometimes he's intentionally cruel, but in this and many films in which he's an antagonist, he's just an animal reacting to stimuli. Godzilla is not evil, he's a natural result of humanity's actions. While I enjoy plenty of films where Gojira is smarter and empathetic, there is such a charm to an animal that is just following their instincts. Within this film, much of the destruction seems almost accidental. They do not target people, though they target machinery in Mothra's egg. There is an intense appearance of evil in their stare, but there is no more malice in their actions than there is in any carnivore. However, while this Gojira is not evil, its presence is the direct result of people's actions. Interestingly, while this is the 4th Godzilla movie, it's the first movie where Japan is responsible for attracting Godzilla. The first movie is, of course, very important in expressing the pain and suffering inflicted on Pacific Islands by the United States military and nuclear weapons and testing. The sorrow and fear felt through that film is so powerful, and it makes it one of the most moving pieces of anti-war propaganda. However, with Mothra vs. Godzilla, we see the start of a trend to focus on the actions of not only the US, Russia, and their stand-ins, but also of Japan. While it wouldn't be until GMK that the Godzilla franchise would recognize the war crimes Japan committed during World War II, this film highlights the destruction caused by industrialism and nuclear materials when pursued by Japanese businesses. By turning the target of the political commentary stateside, the franchise ensured the films wouldn't just be thoughtful examinations of the impact of the US and Russia on Japan, or of the past, but on Japan on the world, and of the future as well. Happy Enterprises is a surprisingly simple yet effective criticism of corporate greed. At the start of the film, the businessmen are not mustache-twirling villains looking to destroy the world, but opportunistic entrepreneurs looking for a great promo. You can see this in how they actually do agree to pay the anglers that pulled in the Mothra egg fairly for their catch. They don't actually fulfill on this promise, though. As far as they are concerned, though, this is an interesting anomaly that can make them money, so they are willing to spend money to make money. Though it's never laid out, it's the juxtaposition with them honestly paying for labor at the start of the film, with how they behave going forwards, that touches on the corrupting influence of wealth and notoriety. The two entrepreneurs discuss just how wealthy this egg can make them, as the Shobijin appear to request that their cultural icon be returned. Their inner monsters emerge, and they decide to attack them. Even though the Mothra egg doesn't belong to them, they're willing to violently oppose people who merely ask for it back. However, it escalates when Ichiro, Junko, and Miura finally explain to them that this is Mothra's egg, and they finally understand the whole story and the immense danger that comes with having a kaiju's egg, and they actually instead offer to buy the Shobijin, as if they are items instead of sentient people. Or fairies. I don't know if fairies and people are interchangeable. Whatever. Yet, as they refuse to return the egg, their greed comes at a price, as the egg attracts Godzilla. Even as Godzilla looms over them, the two businessmen argue over their now-failed venture, coming to blows and even murder over repaying the money invested. The killer then attempts to collect all the money he can, only to be crushed underneath Godzilla's wrath. Our human heroes are not heavy-handed in their criticism, but they do criticize the businessmen throughout the film. It's clear. However, even though they are disgusted, Ichiro is frustrated that he can't do anything about it, which leads to one of the other great main themes, the importance and role of journalism. While Junko is an optimist, Ichiro is more pessimistic. While he writes about the immoral practices of Happy Enterprises, the wealthy amusement park company can buy an incredible amount of good PR around the world. Gosh, glad that doesn't happen on our Earth, right? He expresses frustration in the seeming limit of his power, to which his boss rightfully points out that the press shouldn't have the power to directly impact people. Ichiro agrees, but still remains frustrated that his words don't seem to have much of an impact even indirectly, to which his boss rightfully points out that his writing needs more punch. Before he can write that, though, Godzilla appears, and their focus switches to asking Mothra for help in saving Japan. Ichiro doesn't like the idea of begging for help from people his country has hurt. Junko fears that, given they were unable to save the egg, the infant islanders will not welcome them. Miura and their boss, however, see that they have no alternative choice, and thus they entreat the infant islanders for help. I like this conflict of characters because we don't have two heroes arguing over whether to do something good or something bad, or doing one bad thing or a different bad thing, but rather whether they should do something necessary but shameful or something respectful but passive. This also puts a capstone on the theme of the importance of journalism, as our two journalist heroes don't impede or insist, but they inform the infant islanders of Godzilla's rampage and appeal to their emotions. They do not force any action, but they use the truth to elicit an emotional response. This is also a great time to talk about the third main theme of the film, that of the environmental destruction of colonialism. Not only is the deity of the island's egg obviously an important cultural artifact held as a source of entertainment in Japan, but Infant Island is itself devastated as a result of nuclear weapons testing. Interestingly, previous films focus on the results of US and Russian nuclear weapons on Japanese people. However, part of the discussion here relates interesting commentary for then present-day Japan. Ichiro mentions he can't help but feel responsible, to which Miura responds that there are protests against nukes in Japan, but seeing the environmental devastation is more illuminating. In 1965, 1 year after this film came out, Prime Minister Eisaku Sato met with Lyndon B. Johnson to pursue securing nuclear weapons for Japan. He thought that while older citizens would oppose it, younger citizens could be, quote, educated, end quote, to see things his way. Learning this was surprising to me as a US American, as for my whole life, I've known Japan to be officially opposed to nuclear weapons. Well, yes, just 2 years after this conversation between Sato and Johnson, Sato announced the Hikaku-san Gensoku, or the 3 non-nuclear principles, forbidding the possession, manufacturing, or introduction of nuclear weapons within Japanese territories. This is because, despite potentially seeing the benefit to nukes, Sato recognized his constituents would not stand for the use of nuclear weapons, even as a deterrent. The guilt these 3 characters feel is aligned with the same public sentiment to which Sato capitulated. Gojira 54 was a reaction to the social pain caused by the United States nuclear weapons program, both at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as well as their testings done in the Pacific Islands. And that theme has continued throughout most of the franchise. Again, it's very impactful, and I think it makes it one of the most important movies that I've seen. The inclusion of nuclear weapons testing in this film, though, is a look forward to a potential future of Japan, one in which its citizens must come to terms with the actions its government allowed within the Pacific Ocean. Again, this franchise would not discuss the war crimes committed by the Japanese military in its imperial age for a while, but it does examine the current harm and threats that the Japanese private and governmental sectors bring both to its citizens and to the indigenous peoples of Pacific Islands, who are the main victims shown in this film. The film shows a deep conscience that is often overlooked when people discuss the films of this franchise. While it may not be as popular as Gojira 54 and might seem a little bit silly, I believe it has just as much important things to say. Of course, to discuss the finale is also to discuss the final theme of the film, rebirth. Mothra is the hero of this story. She sacrifices herself for her children, who, in turn, risk their own lives for human children. Mothra's stories very often include themes of rebirth and reincarnation, and I won't presume to speak on their religious meanings to religions of which I myself am not a member. However, what I can speak to is the emotional impact the events of this film lay out. Mothra is dying. While it is easy to forget in the film, as Godzilla does deal some damage, she is not killed by his atomic fire. Like all Lepidopterans, and all living things, she has a limited lifespan. However, in her last moments, she protects her twins and seems to transfer some sort of energy to them. These twins, which in turn save children as well, have embodied her good nature and heroism, even though they don't see her example. The goodness of the mother is continued by her children, and these children save more children themselves. In the film's final moments, we are told that the only way to thank the Mothra twins is by building a better world, one based on mutual trust. Mothra is one of my favorite characters in all of cinema, and it's in part because her legacy of goodness lives on well past her own life. While Mothra is literally reborn, her kindness and her love for humanity is as well, and not just in her children, but in the people she helped. This way, Mothra is not just a mother to her own children, but a symbolic mother to humanity, as they will follow her example to help one another. And that is just some of the reasons I love this film. I would definitely recommend it. It's a great time and very impactful. Plus, this guy is one of the best comic relief characters I've seen in any film. Only shows up when it wouldn't cut the tension, but adds a good laugh in a dire moment. All around great stuff.